In this gripping tale of love, betrayal, and redemption, we dive deep into the emotional rollercoaster of betrayal and redemption, the heart-wrenching journey of a cheating wife. Follow Mike as he navigates the devastating discovery of his wife Rachel's infidelity, fueled by the meddling influence of her sister Jessica. As Mike and Rachel confront their shattered marriage, they embark on a painful yet hopeful journey to rebuild trust and rekindle their love. Join us as we explore the complexities of their relationship, the challenges they face, and the enduring power of forgiveness. Stay tuned for a story that will tug at your heartstrings and keep you on the edge of your seat. The heavy thud of dirt striking the coffin reverberated through the overcast air, each impact driving the reality of my loss deeper into my soul. I stood there, a somber observer, as the minister's comforting words tried in vain to console those grieving. My daughter, Ashley, clung to my hand, her grip a lifeline in this sea of sorrow. Just behind us, her husband, Tom, rested his hand on my shoulder in a silent gesture of support. Beside me, my son, James, stood with his girlfriend, Emma, both of them looking as lost and heartbroken as I felt. At 49, I never imagined I'd be standing at my wife's graveside. Deep down, I always thought I'd go first, given my job and lifestyle. I pictured myself as an old man when my time came, but now I felt ancient, every second without Rachel stretching endlessly before me. After the funeral, we had a reception at our home. People approached me, offering their condolences, praising my wife, and reminiscing about how wonderful she was. Yet no one said what I truly needed to hear. Rachel and I had been married for over 20 years. We had 2 kids who were now living their own lives. Our youngest, Ashley, was married and expecting my first grandchild. James worked in New York City's financial district. Both were thriving. With so many people at the house, my house now, I struggled with the concept of being single. Everything had been ours for the past 20 years, not mine. Around 40 people were gathered, talking and showing their support. All I wanted was solitude. Feeling overwhelmed, I slipped into the backyard, making my way to the back gate for a short walk. Just as I closed the gate, a car pulled up in the alley and parked beside me. It was Jessica, Rachel's younger sister, the last person I wanted to see. In many ways, she was partly to blame for Rachel's absence. If Jessica had minded her own business, Rachel would still be here. "I'm going for a walk," I told Jessica, not smiling or inviting her inside. Everyone is inside talking about her. I needed to get away, certain she would try to join me. I should have known better. She brushed past me and went into the backyard. Jessica had always been self-centered. Her sudden interest in Rachel's life made me suspicious. It wasn't like her. I sighed, relieved to be rid of her for the moment. There was a rift between us, an insurmountable chasm. Family or not, Jessica was unwelcome in my life. It's a long story about how everything led to today's funeral. Life moves on, unrelenting, like a river. Here's my story. This is how my life unfolded. Rachel and I met after college at our workplace, an insurance company where I went to renew my house and car policies. She was my assigned agent. After our initial meeting, I found excuses to return and eventually gathered the courage to ask her out. A few months of dating revealed our deep love for each other, and we decided to marry. We had 2 children, and our marriage was wonderful until 2 years ago. I never doubted marrying Rachel. We were incredibly compatible. Then Jessica started poking into Rachel's life. I think she meant well, believing Rachel needed to grow as a person and be more loving. Jessica tried hard to help Rachel with what she saw as flaws. It started with Wednesday night outings, expanding to Fridays. Soon, Jessica spent more time with Rachel than I did, monopolizing her evenings when I'd normally be home. It quickly became all about Jessica. When it turned into a daily thing, I withdrew from Rachel. Every attempt to spend time with her was thwarted by Jessica's presence. Whenever I wanted to be with Rachel or planned a dinner, what was once an open and communicative relationship became stifled. I couldn't express my feelings without Rachel getting upset, accusing me of being harsh on her sister. If trying to be with my wife only caused trouble, why bother? Months passed, and girls' nights out took over our lives. I saw our marriage crumbling but couldn't talk to Rachel without her getting defensive. So I did the worst thing. I gave up. I buried myself in my interests while Rachel did her own thing. On rare nights at home, we felt like strangers. One night, or rather early morning, everything fell apart. The night before, I was in the garage working on a project while Rachel and Jessica were out as usual. They left around 6:30, and I made my own dinner, eating in the garage. I worked until late and went inside, expecting Rachel to be in bed, but she wasn't home yet. The phone's flashing light indicated a message. Rachel's voice said she was staying at Jessica's because she couldn't drive home and would see me in the morning. I thought, why bother? I never see you anyway. Just move in with your sister and be happy. I was angry and jealous. I missed our conversations, laughter, and playful moments. After replaying and deleting the voicemail, I felt more alone than ever. When I called Rachel's phone, I overheard men's voices in the background at Jessica's house, sounding like a lively party. After 9 rings, a man answered, making a snide remark about my money and advising me not to waste it. I demanded to speak to Rachel, but he casually mentioned she was busy and suggested I call back around noon the next day. He even had the audacity to call himself her husband before abruptly hanging up on me. Enraged, I redialed repeatedly over the next half hour, but no one answered. After the third attempt and growing angrier by the minute, I grabbed my car keys and stormed out, driving straight to Jessica's house. When I arrived, the place was deserted. I realized I had called Rachel's cell phone, not Jessica's landline. I had no clue where she was or who she was with. Panic and anger intertwined as I thought about whether she was there by choice or something more sinister had occurred. I returned home, more furious and scared than ever. I poured myself a stiff drink, trying to make sense of it all. My mind played cruel tricks, suggesting Rachel might have willingly invited those men. The alcohol only fueled my paranoia and despair. By morning, I woke with a splitting headache and a dry mouth. After a shower and some aspirin, I looked in the mirror and saw a man who was utterly lost. I forced down a light breakfast, anxiously waiting for a call or for Rachel to return. Around 2 p.m., Rachel pulled into the driveway, looking stunning in one of my favorite dresses, slinky, tight-fitting, showing plenty of leg and a hint of cleavage. She had only worn it on special occasions with me, and even then only if she intended for a late night. She breezed in, explaining she hadn't come home because she and Jessica had too many drinks and she was too tired to drive. She claimed she had crashed at Jessica's, slept in, showered, and now she was back. But her carefree attitude only made my blood boil. Seeing my obvious distress, she asked what was wrong. I told her I had called her phone multiple times the previous night. The first call was answered by a man who said she was occupied and claimed to be her husband before hanging up on me. No one answered my subsequent calls. Looking at her in that dress, I couldn't shake the suspicion that she had worn it for someone else, especially since when I checked, Jessica's house was dark and empty. Rachel took a seat but missed the chair, collapsing onto the floor, her face turning pale as she processed what I was saying. She remained there motionless, hands covering her face, tears streaming down. Her reaction told me everything. I stormed out to the garage, locking the door behind me and blasting the stereo. I spent the next few hours in a rage, smashing things and cursing Jessica, Rachel, and the man who answered her phone. When I finally cooled off and turned off the music, the reality of my crumbling marriage hit me. Jessica's meddling had driven a wedge between Rachel and me, and now it seemed Rachel was seeking solace elsewhere, possibly with another man or, worse, several men. I realized I might have lost Rachel for good, and divorce seemed inevitable. When I returned to the house, it was empty. Assuming Rachel had gone to Jessica's, I was shocked to find her dresser drawers open and empty. The closet was nearly bare. She had left me. Since it was Sunday, I turned to online banking to protect my finances in case Rachel made her departure permanent. I wasn't about to let years of hard-earned savings slip away. I contacted a friend who had gone through a divorce, setting up a meeting to discuss my situation. I also told our kids about the strange events, admitting I didn't know where their mother was. A week passed, and I threw myself into work to avoid thinking about my disintegrating home life. Each night, I drank and slept fitfully, barely managing to shower and get to work each morning. It had been a week since I last saw Rachel when I finally met with my friend. His advice was what I expected: protect your assets and figure out Rachel's intentions. Rachel remained silent all week with no calls or visits. By Saturday night, I was convinced she had left me for another man. I decided to call Jessica's house. Jessica was shocked to hear that Rachel wasn't with me. She assumed Rachel was still upset and staying close to home. I informed her that Rachel hadn't been home at all and that she might be with the man who answered her phone. Jessica argued it was unfair to blame her, but I firmly told her that her constant interference had ruined my marriage. Her girls' nights out had driven a wedge between Rachel and me, and now I was certain Rachel was gone for good, likely with another man. Jessica was caught off guard when I mentioned I knew about last Friday night. She admitted that on Saturday afternoon, Rachel showed up at her house in what she called her want-to-get-laid dress, freshly showered. Jessica said she told Rachel about a strange man answering her phone, which made Rachel cry. Later, when Jessica came back from the garage, she found Rachel had packed her things and left. Jessica concluded by saying her actions had cost me my wife and warned Rachel to stay away from me despite Rachel's pleas. I couldn't listen because my anger was too intense. I wanted to shut everything out: her, Rachel, the other man, and life in general. Furious didn't even begin to describe my feelings. Just hearing Jessica's voice reignited my rage. I was lost, and my wife was gone with no way to fix our relationship. After a heated phone call, I slammed the phone down so hard that I broke it, adding a new phone to my list of problems. It took a while before I found the energy to get up and go to bed, realizing I had been sitting in the same spot where Rachel had collapsed on me not long ago. By morning, I knew I'd come out on the losing end and would have been better off staying up all night drinking. A dreary Sunday morning greeted me, and I was in no mood to deal with anyone. Around noon, I heard a car pull up in the driveway. Looking out the window, I saw James getting out. He asked what had happened, mentioning that Rachel came to his place a week ago upset and crying but wouldn't tell him anything except that I was going to leave her. He wanted to know what was going on. I told him we were having problems and that she had left me, packed her things, and this was the first time I knew where she had been. James said it was embarrassing because he had a friend over and Rachel spent the night at his place. He asked when she showed up at my place. I told him it was on Sunday after he called and talked to me. She refused to let me call him and talk to him, fearing he would hunt her down. He questioned if I was going to hurt her. I explained that I was exhausted after a week of worry and stress like never before. James had to drive over 300 miles on a Sunday to ask what was going on and why his mom was at his place refusing to let him talk to me. Last week, she went out with Aunt Jessica. Rachel told him about that. She ended up missing my call, and somehow I got really angry about it. He asked why I got so mad. I explained that she missed my call, and that's what she told him, but she mentioned someone else intercepted the call before she knew about it, and I got really mad. She was scared, so she ran. He noted that she left out some important details and asked me to explain what happened. I recounted that last Friday night Rachel went out with Jessica as usual. I was in the garage working on a few things and came in around 11, only to find Rachel wasn't home yet. She had left a message saying she had too much to drink and was going to stay at Jessica's. James acknowledged that Rachel told him about the message part. He said when she left the message, he replayed it to make sure he understood it correctly. Noting that I often did that, he replayed it and heard men's voices in the background, which worried him. So he called Rachel's cell phone, and a strange guy picked up after 9 rings. He asked to speak to her, but the guy said she was tied up and to call back tomorrow afternoon. He identified himself as her husband, but the guy hung up after telling him to duck off. I realized that Rachel had sugar-coated that part. James asked if Rachel had cheated on me, and I admitted I wasn't sure. She left before we could talk about it, but she seemed guilty of something. I hadn't spoken to her since Saturday afternoon. James suggested we needed to talk and proposed we go over to his place to discuss things. He assured us that he and his new girlfriend would be there to support us. I agreed, and he emphasized we should come as we are without weapons. He recognized my anger but urged us to work things out and not let this situation fester. He offered to follow me home, and I considered riding with him in case things didn't work out at his place. He assured me he would make sure I got home okay. During the drive to James's place, I realized I still had some love for Rachel, even if she had cheated on me. At that moment, I was willing to try to work things out with her. When we arrived at James's place, he parked, and we went inside. Emma was sitting with Rachel. When I walked in, they both stood up looking nervous. Rachel greeted me, asking how I had been. I felt the anger boiling inside me and barely managed to control it. I yelled at her, accusing her of cheating, and saw her shrinking from me. I had to pause and catch myself, apologizing for my outburst. I admitted I had been drinking too much and feeling confused about everything. Rachel looked pale and nervous. The woman I loved, the woman I had spent most of my life with, was afraid of me. That hurt me deeply. My heart was breaking. I loved her still, and she was afraid of me. I wondered if we could patch things up. Emma, presumably the guest, interjected, introducing herself. She expressed a wish that we could have met under better circumstances. I took her offered hand and shook it gently, responding that I shared the same sentiment and hoped we could get to know each other more, although James hadn't mentioned seeing anyone yet. I glanced knowingly at him, conveying a slight reprimand with my eyes. Emma urged us to talk while she and James stayed in the other room, ready to intervene if things got difficult. They emphasized the need for us to keep our cool due to the thin walls and floors in the apartment building. After James and Emma left, Rachel began to explain herself, starting with an apology. I interrupted her, asking if she had something specific to be sorry about and if she had slept with another man. She hesitated, then admitted it was more complicated than that. I pressed for details, and what she revealed left me speechless. Rachel confessed that she had been with multiple men that night, and I was stunned. This was not the woman I had married. She tried to explain, saying she had been drunk, and Jessica had been urging her to go out for weeks. She didn't fully understand how it all happened, but she ended up in bed with 2 men, and by the end of the night, she had been with all of them, including Jessica. Jessica had orchestrated the whole thing, making sure Rachel didn't see it as coercion. She was so drunk she didn't think about the consequences until it was too late. Her confession hit me like a ton of bricks. I had suspected she might have cheated, but this was beyond anything I could have imagined. To think my wife and Jessica, her sister, had been involved in such a situation was too much to bear. I sat there, unable to find the words. Rachel wasn't hiding anything, she was spilling everything, and it was tearing me apart. She read my silence as a sign to continue, saying she didn't remember her wedding vows or me waiting at home. At one point, she even found herself begging for more. She called herself a terrible person who didn't deserve me or to live. Her sobs took over, and she collapsed. I just watched, feeling detached from the woman I thought I knew. My shock turned to nausea, and I had to leave the room to throw up. After calming down, I managed to drink some water and return to the table where Rachel was still crying. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know if I could ever touch her again. I sat down, trying to find something to say or ask without getting sick again. She insisted that the nights out with Jessica weren't meant for finding men and that this had never happened before. They had gone to a new club, and she had drunk too much. The men there bought them drinks, danced with them, and made her feel attractive and carefree. She called me, left a message, and then went to their place. I cut her off, expressing my frustration. I told her she hadn't been paying attention to me lately and blamed her and Jessica for not letting me in. I reminded her how I had tried to get her to go out with me, but she always chose Jessica. I accused her of lying to me since her message said she was at Jessica's place. She clarified, saying they initially planned to go to Jessica's but ended up at the men's place first. She thought it wouldn't be a problem but got caught in a regrettable situation. Rachel tried to blame me for not paying more attention to her, but I lost my patience. I raised my voice, pointing out how she ignored me and went out with Jessica every chance she got. I accused her of pushing me out of her life. She finally admitted that she hadn't realized how much she was ignoring me and acknowledged that her constant outings with Jessica had driven a wedge between us. I asked if she enjoyed being in those situations, referring to her as a scarlet woman. She denied ever calling me that or treating me like one. She admitted that she enjoyed the new experiences with those men, things she had wanted to try with me but couldn't ask. She regretted losing herself and me in the process. She hated that she had shared intimate acts with others that should have been reserved for me. I told her I wasn't sure if we could move past this, but there might be a chance. She grabbed onto that hope, promising to do anything to stay with me and be a better wife. She vowed not to go out unless I was with her and committed to being a stay-at-home wife. I remained skeptical, questioning her sudden change and whether she would revert to her old ways once things settled down. I emphasized how Jessica had driven a wedge between us and expressed my discontent. I told her I hadn't realized how much she had been ignoring and avoiding me. I made it clear that things wouldn't be simple moving forward. She had cheated on me, and it had taken an emotional toll. I asked about her involvement with other men, emphasizing the damage it had done to us. I confronted Rachel about her deception, questioning if she would have kept up the lie about staying with Jessica if I hadn't found out. My anger was boiling over, and she could see it in my eyes as my voice grew louder. Just then, James and Emma entered the kitchen quietly. James suggested we take a break, proposing that either he and I or Emma and I go for a walk. Emma gently took my arm, guiding me out of my chair with a firm grip that belied her strength. She suggested we walk and talk, giving James and Rachel some privacy to discuss things. I agreed, realizing that stepping away was the best option to prevent an outburst. As we strolled around the neighborhood, Emma initiated the conversation, acknowledging my anger. She told me that Rachel was genuinely remorseful about what she had done and that she had been plagued by guilt. Emma had talked with Rachel while James fetched me, and she wanted to share Rachel's regret with me. I listened, processing the information. Eventually, I expressed my frustration and highlighted Rachel's significant mistakes. I pointed out how much time Rachel had spent with her sister, Jessica, time that should have been ours. The revelation of their drunken escapade fueled my resentment, and I felt a deep sense of betrayal. Emma then shared a personal story about her own family. A few years ago, her mother had gone out with friends and ended up involved with another man. Emma had been worried about her father's reaction but was relieved when her parents managed to work things out. She clarified that this didn't necessarily mean they stayed married but showed that resolution was possible. Emma emphasized that Rachel's mistake was serious and multi-layered. Despite this, she believed Rachel still loved me and hadn't completely cast me aside. According to Emma, Rachel had made a grave error and found herself in a situation that spiraled out of control. She attributed such situations to the influence of alcohol, lowered inhibitions, peer pressure, and unintended consequences. As we walked and talked, I shared my perspective on the situation. While Rachel had strayed, I had remained faithful. I also highlighted the negative impact of Jessica frequently visiting and taking Rachel away from me. Emma's soothing voice helped calm my anger. Reflecting on the uncertain future of my relationship with Rachel, I admitted to feeling torn apart inside. Despite my attempts to sound optimistic, I couldn't shake the emotional turmoil. Part of my struggle was understanding how Rachel found herself in such a compromising situation. Suppressing my anger, I tried to maintain composure, knowing that rising above righteous indignation was necessary. Emma encouraged me to ask any questions I had. Despite my efforts to lift my mood, the emotional burden remained. Emma inquired about the state of our relationship before Jessica's frequent visits. I explained that despite the natural ebb and flow of our 20-year marriage, I believed we were doing fine, perhaps even better than many couples. Emma asked if I used to take Rachel out often. I admitted that I might have taken her for granted and that Jessica's constant presence had driven a wedge between us. Whenever I tried to spend time with Rachel, Jessica would interfere, causing Rachel to refuse or get upset. I expressed my frustration, calling Jessica a meddling influence. Emma probed deeper, asking about the romantic aspects of our relationship. I confessed that after so many years together, I had assumed the effort to maintain romance was no longer necessary. Emma emphasized the importance of keeping romance alive, distinguishing it from mere physical relationships. I acknowledged this oversight and regretted not putting in more effort to make Rachel feel special. Emma's guidance made me realize that being more romantic could have made a difference. However, Rachel's time with Jessica had already taken away our chance for equal time together. Emma pointed out that our biggest fights revolved around Rachel and Jessica's nights out, emphasizing that Rachel seemed more focused on her sister than on our marriage. She suggested that our drift was evident and that better communication and understanding might have prevented the current crisis. I expressed frustration, wondering if Emma was siding with Rachel, but she reassured me that it wasn't about blame. Emma acknowledged that Rachel needed something she wasn't getting from me, and if we had addressed those issues earlier, the crisis might have been averted. I defended my efforts, stating that I never considered cheating despite my frustrations with Rachel's time spent with Jessica. Emma urged me to talk to Rachel directly, advising a calm and straightforward approach. She reminded me that James thought highly of me and emphasized that divorce might not be the solution, encouraging open communication. Emma suggested that resolving our issues through conversation could rekindle our love and help us move past the recent challenges. Mike leaned against the wall of his son's apartment, the conversation with Emma still fresh in his mind. His thoughts drifted back to the first time he met Rachel. It was a sunny day in the early 2000s when he walked into the insurance company to renew his house and car policies. Rachel was the assigned agent for his account. She was seated behind a desk, her auburn hair catching the light from the window, and her warm smile made an immediate impression on him. Mike remembered their initial meeting vividly. They exchanged pleasantries, and Rachel's professionalism and kindness were evident from the start. He found excuses to return to the office, asking questions about his policies and seeking her advice on various matters. Each visit was a chance to see her, and he relished every moment. Their conversations grew longer, and he felt a connection forming. After a few months of these visits, Mike gathered the courage to ask Rachel out for a coffee. Their first date was at a small cafe near her office. Rachel was easy to talk to, and they found they had much in common. They both enjoyed hiking, loved classic movies, and had a shared fondness for Italian cuisine. The hours flew by, and by the end of the date, Mike knew he wanted to see her again. Rachel felt the same, and soon, they were spending more time together, exploring the city, going on hikes, and watching old movies at home. Their relationship blossomed quickly. Mike was captivated by Rachel's intelligence, her sense of humor, and her caring nature. She was the kind of person who lit up a room with her presence. After a few months of dating, Mike knew he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her. He proposed during a hike to their favorite spot overlooking the city. Rachel said yes, and their future together seemed full of promise. Mike and Rachel got married in a small ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. They bought a house in the suburbs and started building their life together. They had 2 children, Ashley and James, and their home was filled with love and laughter. Rachel was a devoted mother, and Mike enjoyed being a father. They were a team, navigating the ups and downs of life together. Mike worked hard at his job, providing for his family, while Rachel balanced her career and raising their children. They made time for each other, going on dates and family vacations. Their marriage was not without its challenges, but they always found a way to overcome them. Communication was key, and they prided themselves on their ability to talk through their problems. 2 years ago, things began to change. Jessica, Rachel's younger sister, started visiting more frequently. At first, Mike thought it was nice for Rachel to have a close relationship with her sister. But as time went on, Jessica's visits became more intrusive. She would show up unannounced, often staying late into the night. Jessica encouraged Rachel to go out more, to live a little, as she put it. What started as occasional girls' nights out soon became a regular occurrence. Wednesday nights turned into Fridays, and before long, Jessica was monopolizing Rachel's time. Mike found himself alone more often, his attempts to plan dinners or spend time with Rachel thwarted by Jessica's constant presence. He tried to express his feelings to Rachel, but every conversation ended in an argument. Rachel accused him of being harsh on her sister, and Mike began to withdraw. As the months passed, the distance between Mike and Rachel grew. He buried himself in his interests, spending hours in the garage working on projects, while Rachel was out with Jessica. The nights they did spend together were awkward, filled with tension and unspoken words. Mike missed the closeness they once shared, the conversations, the laughter, the intimacy. He felt like he was losing his wife to her sister. One night, Mike decided he had had enough. He wanted to reclaim his marriage, to find a way back to the relationship they once had. He planned a special dinner, hoping to surprise Rachel and spend some quality time together. He cooked her favorite meal, set the table with candles and flowers, and waited for her to come home. But when Rachel walked through the door, she was on the phone with Jessica, making plans to go out. Mike's heart sank. He tried to talk to Rachel, to convince her to stay home with him, but she was adamant about going out. An argument ensued, and Rachel left, slamming the door behind her. Mike sat at the dining table, staring at the meal he had prepared, feeling more alone than ever. The night that changed everything started like any other. Jessica had come over, and she and Rachel were getting ready to go out. Mike retreated to the garage, hoping to avoid another confrontation. He worked on his project until late, trying to keep his mind off the growing rift in his marriage. Around 11 p.m., he went inside, expecting to find Rachel in bed, but the house was empty. A blinking light on the answering machine caught his attention. Rachel's voice filled the room, explaining that she was staying at Jessica's because she couldn't drive home. She would see him in the morning. Mike felt a surge of anger and frustration. He missed Rachel, missed the way things used to be. He replayed the message, trying to make sense of his feelings. He decided to call Rachel's phone. The call went to voicemail, and he left a message. A few minutes later, he called again, and this time, a man answered. The man made a snide remark about Mike's money and told him not to waste it. Mike demanded to speak to Rachel, but the man said she was busy and suggested Mike call back around noon the next day. He even had the audacity to call himself her husband before hanging up. Enraged, Mike redialed repeatedly, but no one answered. He grabbed his car keys and stormed out, driving straight to Jessica's house. When he arrived, the place was deserted. He realized he had called Rachel's cell phone, not Jessica's landline. Panic and anger intertwined as he thought about whether Rachel was there by choice or if something more sinister had occurred. He returned home, more furious and scared than ever. He poured himself a stiff drink, trying to make sense of it all. His mind played cruel tricks, suggesting Rachel might have willingly invited those men. The alcohol only fueled his paranoia and despair. By morning, he woke with a splitting headache and a dry mouth. After a shower and some aspirin, he looked in the mirror and saw a man who was utterly lost. He forced down a light breakfast, anxiously waiting for a call or for Rachel to return. Around 2 p.m., Rachel pulled into the driveway, looking stunning in one of Mike's favorite dresses. She breezed in, explaining she hadn't come home because she and Jessica had too many drinks and she was too tired to drive. She claimed she had crashed at Jessica's, slept in, showered, and now she was back. But her carefree attitude only made Mike's blood boil. Seeing his obvious distress, Rachel asked what was wrong. Mike told her he had called her phone multiple times the previous night. The first call was answered by a man who said she was occupied and claimed to be her husband before hanging up on him. No one answered his subsequent calls. Looking at her in that dress, Mike couldn't shake the suspicion that she had worn it for someone else, especially since when he checked, Jessica's house was dark and empty. Rachel took a seat but missed the chair, collapsing onto the floor. Her face turned pale as she processed what Mike was saying. She remained there motionless, hands covering her face, tears streaming down. Her reaction told Mike everything. Unable to handle it any longer, he stormed out to the garage, locking the door behind him and blasting the stereo. He spent the next few hours in a rage, smashing things and cursing Jessica, Rachel, and the man who answered her phone. When he finally cooled off and turned off the music, the reality of his crumbling marriage hit him. Jessica's meddling had driven a wedge between Rachel and him, and now it seemed Rachel was seeking solace elsewhere, possibly with another man or, worse, several men. Mike realized he might have lost Rachel for good, and divorce seemed inevitable. When he returned to the house, it was empty. Assuming Rachel had gone to Jessica's, he was shocked to find her dresser drawers open and empty. The closet was nearly bare. She had left him. Since it was Sunday, Mike turned to online banking to protect his finances in case Rachel made her departure permanent. He wasn't about to let years of hard-earned savings slip away. He contacted a friend who had gone through a divorce, setting up a meeting to discuss his situation. He also told their kids about the strange events, admitting he didn't know where their mother was. A week passed, and Mike threw himself into work to avoid thinking about his disintegrating home life. Each night, he drank and slept fitfully, barely managing to shower and get to work each morning. It had been a week since he last saw Rachel when he finally met with his friend. His advice was what Mike expected: protect your assets and figure out Rachel's intentions. Rachel remained silent all week with no calls or visits. By Saturday night, Mike was convinced she had left him for another man. Mike sat in his living room, nursing a glass of whiskey, his mind a whirlwind of anger and confusion. The events of the past few days had left him drained and disoriented. His marriage, once the cornerstone of his life, now felt like a crumbling ruin. The front door creaked open, and Rachel walked in. She looked worn out, her eyes puffy from crying. She hesitated for a moment, then stepped inside, closing the door softly behind her. "I need to talk to you," Rachel said, her voice barely above a whisper. Mike nodded, motioning for her to sit. She took a seat across from him, fidgeting with the hem of her dress. Mike studied her, searching for any hint of the woman he had fallen in love with. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. "Mike, I don't know where to start," Rachel began, her voice trembling. "I know I've hurt you. I've made terrible mistakes, and I don't know how to make things right." Mike took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Start with the truth, Rachel. I need to know what happened." Rachel nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I let Jessica influence me. She kept telling me I needed to live more, to have fun. I got caught up in it, and I started going out more, spending less time with you. I thought it was harmless at first, but it got out of hand." She paused, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "That night, the one you called about, I was at a club with Jessica. We were drinking, dancing, and these men started talking to us. I was so drunk, Mike. I didn't think clearly. One thing led to another, and I ended up going back to their place." Mike's heart clenched, but he forced himself to listen. "Go on." Rachel took a shuddering breath. "I slept with them, Mike. All of them. Jessica was there too. She encouraged it, made it seem like it was no big deal. I was too drunk to think straight, and I just went along with it. The next morning, I woke up and realized what I had done. I felt sick, disgusted with myself." Mike felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He had suspected infidelity, but hearing it confirmed was a different kind of pain. He struggled to keep his composure, his mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and heartbreak. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mike asked, his voice strained. "I was scared, Mike," Rachel admitted. "I knew I had crossed a line, and I didn't know how to face you. I thought if I kept it hidden, maybe we could move past it. But the guilt ate at me. I couldn't look at you without feeling ashamed." Mike set his glass down, his hands trembling. "Rachel, I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this. You broke our trust, our marriage. How am I supposed to move on from this?" Rachel sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "I don't know, Mike. I don't have the answers. All I can say is that I'm sorry. I love you, and I want to make things right, but I don't know how." Mike stood up, pacing the room. He felt like a caged animal, trapped by his emotions. "Rachel, I need time to think. I can't make any decisions right now. I need to process this, to figure out what to do next." Rachel nodded, her face etched with sorrow. "I understand. I'll give you the space you need." As Rachel left the room, Mike sank back into his chair, his mind a whirlwind of emotions. He knew their marriage was hanging by a thread, and he wasn't sure if it could be salvaged. The following week was a blur of work and sleepless nights. Mike avoided Rachel as much as possible, retreating to the garage or going for long drives to clear his head. Rachel respected his need for space, staying with Jessica and only coming home to gather her belongings. Mike spent hours reflecting on their relationship, the good times and the bad. He thought about the early years, when they were inseparable, and the slow decline as Jessica's influence grew. He wondered if they could ever recapture what they had lost or if too much damage had been done. Desperate for guidance, Mike reached out to his friend, Tom, who had gone through a rough divorce a few years earlier. They met at a quiet bar, away from prying eyes and ears. "Tom, I don't know what to do," Mike admitted, nursing his drink. "Rachel admitted to cheating on me, and I don't know if I can ever forgive her." Tom nodded sympathetically. "It's a tough situation, Mike. Betrayal is hard to get over, especially when it involves someone you trusted with your heart. But you need to ask yourself if there's anything worth saving in your marriage. Do you still love her? Can you see a future together?" Mike sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I still love her, but I don't know if that's enough. The trust is shattered, and I don't know if we can rebuild it." Tom leaned back, considering his words carefully. Rebuilding trust takes time and effort from both sides. Rachel needs to show that she's committed to making things right, and you need to be willing to let her try. It's not going to be easy, and it might not work out, but if you both want to save your marriage, it's worth a shot. When Mike returned home that night, he found Rachel waiting for him in the living room. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept in days. Mike took a deep breath, steeling himself for the conversation ahead. "Rachel, we need to talk," Mike began, sitting across from her. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about everything that's happened. I still love you, but I don't know if that's enough to fix this." Rachel nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I understand, Mike. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Just tell me what I need to do." Mike hesitated, then spoke with determination. "If we're going to try to salvage our marriage, we need to start fresh. No more lies, no more secrets. You need to cut ties with Jessica. Her influence has been toxic for our relationship, and we can't move forward with her in the picture." Rachel looked shocked but nodded in agreement. "I'll do it, Mike. I'll talk to Jessica and explain that I need to focus on our marriage. I'll stop going out, and I'll be here with you. Whatever it takes." Mike nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "And we need to go to counseling, both individually and together. We need to address our issues and find a way to rebuild trust." Rachel reached out, taking Mike's hand in hers. "I'll do it, Mike. I'll do whatever it takes to save our marriage." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of emotions and hard work. Rachel cut ties with Jessica, a painful but necessary step. They started attending counseling sessions, both individually and as a couple. The sessions were intense, forcing them to confront their issues head-on. There were tears, arguments, and moments of doubt, but slowly, they began to make progress. Rachel poured her energy into rebuilding their marriage, showing Mike that she was committed to making things right. She planned special dates, cooked his favorite meals, and made an effort to be present and attentive. Mike, in turn, worked on his own issues, learning to express his feelings and communicate better. Months passed, and while the pain of betrayal still lingered, Mike and Rachel began to rebuild their life together. They learned to trust each other again, slowly but surely. Their love, once battered and bruised, started to heal. They found new ways to connect, rediscovering the joy and intimacy they had lost. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Mike took Rachel's hand in his. "I know we have a long way to go, but I believe we can get through this," he said softly. Rachel squeezed his hand, tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for giving us a second chance, Mike. I promise I'll never take our love for granted again." As they watched the sun dip below the horizon, they felt a renewed sense of hope. Their journey was far from over, but they were willing to fight for their love, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be. As we reach the conclusion of Betrayal and Redemption, the heart-wrenching journey of a cheating wife, we witness the remarkable transformation of Mike and Rachel's relationship. Despite the deep wounds caused by betrayal, their commitment to healing and rebuilding their marriage shines through. Through counseling, honest communication, and a renewed focus on each other, they rediscover the love and trust that once bound them together. This journey was not easy, filled with tears, anger, and moments of doubt, but it ultimately led to a stronger, more resilient bond. As Mike and Rachel stand side by side, looking towards a future built on forgiveness and understanding, we are reminded of the enduring power of love and the possibility of redemption. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey, and remember, no matter how dark the times may seem, hope and love can light the way.